Okay, ready to go. Great. Good luck, everybody. As you see, there's always some stuff happening with things are always happening here. So welcome to Shabbos starting to get early. Next week, we're going to be 8 o'clock from then on, right? As you know. And it's going to be the cold winter Saturday night, so everybody's going to be here. And I just want to say before I start that we have a calendar over here, but those who've been here a long time know this is always tentative because you never know what's happening in there. So specifically, December 6th, I got to figure out what to do because I understand that Sharon won't have us that night because they got the NWCP here, right? So he told me that's fair. So stay tuned for information about where it's going to be in December 6th. That's a month from now. That's number one. Number two, I'll skip that. Let's go right to it. No, it's late. Let's begin. We're starting now with the 2025-2026 lecture series, as you know, okay? And it's called Prelude to October 7th, but who knew? Meaning, all you can ever get in a history lecture is context, perspective, and nuance. There's nothing else you can get. So based on that, who knew, okay? Tonight, as you see, is lecture number 2, where Sharon moves to the left, the Disengagement from Gaza, which I think many of us remember. As you can see, tonight, we're being sponsored by the Glazers, by Michael, who is my political consultant. He can tell you, right? He's my political consultant, because most of them don't know what they're talking about. Michael's one of the few that do. In honor of his folks, Milton and Sandy Glazer is sitting over here, and in memory of his uncle Harvey Borblowski, all of us shalom. Thank you very much. As always, we want to thank Shomer Emunah for sponsoring us. We also want to thank, as always, the Lehmann family for sponsoring this series in memory of their father. As I said before, later in the year, they're sponsoring one in memory of their mother. Many of us remember, used to sit right over there. And at least that's how we recall it. And we have a few left that need sponsorships. And other than that, I think we're done. I just want to thank the tech team. As you see, it's always a challenge to get here and make everything happen. I would just say it aside, tonight is the yahrzeit of one of the members of our tech team, with Jake Schuchman, who passed away. That's how we knew he wasn't well, because he wasn't here. He always was very much on time. So say Neshama Shabbat Aliyah. Let's get right down to it. This is controversial and sad stuff, as we all know, but here we go. Hamas is the big name, but it started in the 1980s, if you remember. Hamas started in the 80s, and Hamas started in the Gaza Strip, okay? Now, timing is everything. It started in the 1980s, basically after the Lebanon War of 81-82. And the Lebanon War, if you remember, which was a mess of its own, ended with Arafat and the PLO being exiled to Tunisia, if you recall. So that war did not end the way this one did. What Bibi would like, it's not going to happen, would be Hamas will leave and go somewhere else. Right? That's basically what they said. We won't kill you, this now, just go. They're not going. They don't want to be like Arafat in 1982. You understand? They viewed that as a tremendous blow, and a certain segment of the youth, the Arab youth in Gaza, concluded that the PLO was basically losers who would never be able to attain the goal of Palestinian nationalism, which is the undoing of 1948, from the river to the sea, as they call it now. Not to get a two-state solution, but to get a one-state Arab solution, okay? And Arafat is not going to be the one to do this, and they were correct in this. Because what was the follow-up from the Lebanon War, now with our perspective, what followed the Lebanon War, eventually had to go to the Oslo process, in which at least they said that there's two states. In other words, the Jews have a state too, okay? And as a matter of fact, a state on rove of Palestine. Because if you do the numbers, the state of Israel is the majority of the territory of the original Palestine. So they were kind of right, because by the late 80s, Arafat was compelled, if you remember, under pressure from George Shultz, to say that the PLO renounced violence. In other words, the PLO accepted 1948. This is the last days of the Ronald Reagan administration. I remember this like many do. And Reagan, and Shultz especially, was very pro-Israel. Right, Shultz especially. And in spite of everything I just said, they got Arafat. In the last days, you know, after the election of George Bush Sr., when Reagan was on the way out, to say, we accept Israel, you know, we want a peaceful this, and that, and the other. It still took a couple of years, right? Because if you recall, the original situation was one in which the United States committed under Kissinger, after the 73 war, that they would not talk with the PLO. Okay, that was part of the deals of the disengagement and all the other things, which did culminate in Israel giving back the Sinai. Again, I'm using the power of perspective, okay? But the 73 war, 73, and a few years later, 6 years later, was the peace treaty, and as you know, that was like a, so to speak, a game changer. And part of the deals in the disengagement agreements that Kissinger negotiated at the beginning, the Nixon administration, was that as long as the PLO does not accept the legitimacy of the state of Israel, the United States is not going to talk to them. And that policy was kept up more or less under Carter and under Reagan. Okay, we will remember that Carter's UN ambassador kind of cheated on that. But basically speaking, I'm not saying they never really spoke, but nothing serious. So Schultz kept saying, if you want the Palestinians to be part of this, you have to pay the price. So he did. Now, I'm not dealing with the question, which was he sincere or not. We're just telling what happened. Instead, Arafat agreed. The Palestinians would accept the state on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which leaves Israel with something like 75% of the original Palestine. This reflected the Palestinian assessment that 1948 could not be undone in the present circumstances, especially in the context of the fall of communism, because that was going on in the late 80s, early 90s. Gorbachev was on the way out, which of course happened a year or two later. The U.S. was emerging as the, what can I tell you, the sole superpower, at least for a while. Now that's over, but for 5 minutes in history we had that. And it's because of that, and you had, in the United States at that time committed to Israel, that you got what eventually comes to be the Oslo process. Because there was zero consensus in the world at that time in undoing 1948. Instead, there was a universal consensus of the two-state solution. This has been lost, my friends, as you know, today. Okay? This is a result of the 2-year war in Gaza war. This idea that there's a universal consensus that Israel has a right to exist has been shred, at least among the Hamon Am, and you'll certainly see this in the elections that are coming up in America, and certainly in Europe and places like that. But rather, that Israel is illegitimate, is born in sin, and therefore should be undone. And there are plenty of Jews saying that, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So, especially after Oslo, which included a diplomatic bonanza for Israel. If you remember when Rabin signed with Arafat that agreement, a whole bunch of countries that never had relations with Israel established relations. A whole bunch of countries that never had serious trade with Israel set up trade with Israel, including China, for example, right? Ad kedei kach, at that time, I don't know if you remember this, that there was, even North Korea wanted to establish relations with Israel. It didn't happen in the end, but I mean, that's how powerful the dynamic was. So if you're a kid growing up in Gaza, you say, this is all horrible. The side has been abandoned. The PLO is bankrupt, morally especially. Arafat had no roadmap for undoing 1948. As we know, Arafat had hoped to flexibly find an opportunity to take down Israel using the right of return. Okay, we won't make peace. We'll have two-state solution, but you have to have everybody back, which wipes out Israel. Or you wink at the suicide bombings, activating the Israeli Arabs, Ahmed Tibi and company, and hoping for changes in the international situation, which are constant. The international situation is never static, it's always fluid. Countries rise and fall, power relationships shift, as we know, okay? For the Hamas types, this was pretty poor. Arafat was a loser, if not a traitor. He'd always been an embezzler, so why should this guy be in charge? Finally, this is very important for Hamas, the whole model, the al-Fatah model, the Arafat model of secular nationalism was by itself anathema, okay? Nasser was not a good guy to them. Nasser was the enemy of the Muslim Brotherhood. He actually killed a bunch of them. I don't blame him, but he killed a bunch of them. And the entire model of the Arab state system that exists today, in which you have how many Arab countries? A bunch. I mean, you got Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia and Yemen and the Gulf states and Libya and so on and on and on and on and on. They consider that terrible. it's a clever, from the Arab point of view, from the fundamentalist point of view, they consider this a very effective scheme dreamed up by non-Muslims to break up the Muslims into fighting groups and thereby mess up their power. You see? To Hamas, the Arab state system itself is a khilal of Islam. It shouldn't be all those different countries. It shouldn't be that way, right? Instead of this, you should have this. One big country. I got this from their map, from their website, okay? That should be one country. And if their country, oh, that'll be powerful enough to conquer the world, okay? That's probably bigger than the U.S., okay? So this is the hashkafa, shall we say over here, of Hamas. Plus, of course, they'll add Western Europe if you throw in the modern mass immigration. Now, look at these numbers. And these numbers are from 2 years ago. You know and I know the numbers are bigger today, okay? Somebody told me the other day Boris Johnson let in 2 million immigrants, even in his time. So whatever the case is, look, what should we talk about? What about the United States of America? Go to the next one, right? Isn't he going to be elected? You know that. So it's a game changer. You know, we're living in different times. But I'm talking about the good old days of 30 years ago, okay? 20 years ago. Regarding Israel, Hamas asserted, the policy has to be simple: war to the death, permanent jihad. I mean, literally. Those, you do not stop. Even if it takes 100 years, you do not stop, ever. And not going to beat around the bush about it. The problem with the Israelis who occupied the Gaza Strip in the 1980s, when all this started to cohere and gel, was that it seemed so unrealistic that they regarded the group as eccentric and bizarre. In other words, not a threat like Arafat. Today, you know, this is, everybody acknowledges what a mistake they made. Because Israel could have quashed this at the very beginning, okay, when Sheikh, whatever his name is, Yassin or something, started the whole group. And they didn't, right? They said, good, let it be a counterweight to Arafat. After all, they're never really going to go anywhere. And they, listen, what can I tell you? The smartest people make big mistakes. I mean, that's what history's about. Smart people do dumb things, dumb people do smart things, good people do bad things, bad people do good things. It's a humanistic discipline. We study man. Man is, infinitely unpredictable, okay? So unfortunately, that's what happened over here. You see, Arafat, Israel thought at that time, has international standing all over the world. By contrast, this jihadist stuff had no support. What, support to exterminate Israel as part of a broader caliphate project? When Ronald Reagan was president, it seemed fantastical. So tragically, Israel did not nip Hamas in the bud at the very beginning when it could have. That's what that new book is about, okay, while Israel slept. I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about. He just chronicles it. Now again, the people responsible for the failures are like old and whatever, and you know, they'll justify and all that. What happened, happened, as we know. This is happening today, unfortunately, in regard to the narrative war. Notice Israel has slept in the last 2 years in the narrative war. Israel's not responding to the delegitimation, demonization narrative that Hamas and company are successfully disseminating around the world when they say Israel has no right to exist. And look, my son's going, Mir Hashem, this week with his wife to Italy for a few days. I don't know when they planned it, but I said, you're crazy, right? I'm not talking about Muslim immigrants. The Italians themselves are nuts right now. And wherever you go, they say, are you Jewish? You support Israel? Get out of my store. Get off the bus. Don't get gas in my gas station. I mean, like that. You understand? Now, this is kind of new. We can examine why it happened, but it's new. There's a game changer. So Israel, what can I tell you, didn't foresee this. It was beyond their scope of imagination. Because you see, in the intelligence business, it's kind of always a basic part of it. You have to spend so much time on the immediate threats that you generally don't have time to look at the long term. Now, it's easy for somebody like me sitting here to say this. That's why I'm doing it, because it's easy. But the fact, but it's not wrong. You understand? It's not wrong. And I can only hope that Israel now set up some unit to look at the long-term business, all the rest of it. But it's not even good enough, because we know the way the world operates is you have a few experts at the bottom, but it's not absorbed by the people at the top. You understand? The prime ministers and people like that in Israel always also have a full plate all the time, and it's hard to have long-term planning in this sort of thing. What can I tell you? Okay? But I know one thing, the Torah tells you, Vayareo son of Mitzrim Vayanunu, that before this is a famous part that you probably have heard in the Passover Haggadah. Vayareo son of Mitzrim Vayanunu, first they had to demonize us, and then they could torture us, the Egyptians. So first Paro had to say what a danger the Jews are and how bad they are and this, that, the other. In other words, don't talk about the Yosef part, right? Talk about the other parts. And then everybody was in a mood to go along with Vayanunu. You and I are in this boat at this moment, okay? We're definitely in the Vayareo son of moment. And question is, will we be spared the Vayanunu moment? So by the 1990s, it was Hamas that was causing all the trouble. I'll say it again, it was Hamas that was causing all the trouble as they bitterly attacked the Oslo process. Neither Rabin nor President Clinton had any answer to the problem of Hamas, any more than Bibi or Trump have an answer today. So, what do you call it? Rabin and Clinton had good intentions as far as Israel is concerned, so did Bibi and Trump. What is Trump's, I'm not making fun of anybody, what is Trump's answer to Hamas? Other than words, you understand? I just saw in the news tonight that Ambassador Barak says, Lebanon is a failed state, has no way of getting rid of Hezbollah. You see? So what is the plan? To make matters worse, Ehud Barak's pullout from Lebanon in 2000 confirmed Hamas's analysis of Israel as a paper tiger, or as Nasrallah put it, it's a spider web. You see? Now, in other words, they had guerrilla raids in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah. Israel was drip, 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 losing a few here every day, with anti-personnel mines and all the rest of it. Remember, they had the mothers in green, the mothers in black, whatever it was called, which I understand. And the result is, Barak said, the heck with this, and when he got elected prime minister in 1989, he withdrew in 2000 the Israeli army, leaving the Israeli supporters stuck over there, but he did it. And this is going to be the same thing that's going to move Sharon. I understand the Svara, and we'll talk about it, but understand you're giving tremendous chizuk to the other side and confirming that if you just bother them enough, they'll always retreat. You understand? If you bother them enough, they'll always retreat, so keep bothering them. It provides no incentive for doing the other way around, because the analysis was accurate, right? Until October 7th, 2025, Israel never had the stomach to do the whole job. I've been saying here in this thing, and again, I don't know, a couple years ago, before October 7th, many of you were here, we talked about the fact Hamas is a Stalingrad, and Gaza was turned into a Stalingrad, and southern Lebanon was turned into a Stalingrad. So if you want to fight house to house like the Germans did and all the rest of it, it was 1 million men, but Israel didn't want to do it. And it was just a dangerous business, and we had to pay the price, okay? Now, because of October 7th and the shock and all the rest of it, is that we're going into Stalingrad. Although, to tell you the truth, as much as they destroyed the city, you and I know most of the tunnels are still there. So, it's tough. That's exactly the strategy of Hamas. Make it tough. You see, they won't have the stomach for it. Because, it's only because the current Israeli government is constituted the way it is, with Bibi and his situation, and Smotrich and Ben Gvir and these other guys, that they just said we're going to keep the war going and all the rest. You know and I know there have been big demonstrations in Israel, which I understand for the last year at least, to stop the war. Okay? More than a year. So, it was only on October 8th, 2023, that on the most radical of circumstances, Israel changed it to some degree. In my opinion, this was exactly the thinking of Sinwar when he launched the October 7th attack, which is, Israel's a paper tiger. If you hit him hard enough, the whole state will collapse. You understand? Israel has atomic bombs, all the rest of it. Don't be fooled by these Jewish things. Look at how they pull off every time they're really confronted. The problem with the other states is they never really confront them. We're going to confront them and cross the border and kill everybody and all the rest of it, which he left specific orders: torture this person, burn this person, all the rest of it. This is all now in published. Israel found the documents. You understand? And you'll see the whole country will just collapse. You understand? Now, it's a little bit, especially, by the way, if, as he hoped, Hezbollah would join in on October 7th, and Iran and the others. It's exactly what Hitler said when he invaded Russia. He said, the Soviet Union is so gigantic. It's a ramshackle house, he said. All it needs one good kick, and the whole building will come down. You understand? Well, he was wrong, but I'm just saying that's how he thought it. So Sinwar also thought you get one big shock and the whole Israel will go down. This is basically Arab racism, okay? Because they always say like this is a big slogan in the Arab press. All the Israelis have 2 passports, get it? They're always ready to go somewhere. No, they can leave the country. It's no big deal. They go to America. They have passports in Europe and anyway. So they're not really stuck to the ground that they'll fight for it. It's partially true. As you know, unfortunately, 125,000 have made Yeridah since October 7th. Now, I understand why, but I'm just saying that's a big number. However, there's another side of the coin. 81,000 made Aliyah. So it's a net loss of 45,000. I'm not in favor of any loss, but it's not 125,000. It's interesting. We know people that made Aliyah like a month after October, right? I mean, I know people. So it's a funny kind of a situation. The Arabs didn't conceive, because of their racism, that anybody in any numbers would make Aliyah. The 80,000 Jews would move to Israel after October 7th. So here we are now in 2004 in this lecture series. Hamas was not yet in control of Gaza, but they were already rocketing Sderot, if you remember. Okay? I think many of us remember. I'm looking around this room. I know people that were in Sderot years and years ago, when they were always having to raise money to build those bomb-proof shelters and all the rest of it. When I was there, they were building that yeshiva bomb-proof, right? Now, wait a minute. Wait a second. Bomb-proof from who? From the Gaza Strip. From what? It was Hamas. It was Hamas, okay? Now, you see, the first part of the Oslo Accords, reached in 1994 after the handshake, was the Israeli army withdrawal, listen closely, from the city of Jericho and the city of Gaza, not the Gaza Strip. That was the first part of the Oslo Agreement. Arafat, if you remember, came in, and he actually went to Gaza, and they had a big parade and all the rest of it, and he set up a government, okay? The withdrawal was not from Gush Katif and the Israeli settlements. It was only from the city of Gaza. Nevertheless, you now had a piece of Karka, which the Israelis are not there. As soon as the IDF pulled out of Gaza City, Hamas sprung into action. I'm not talking about what they did a couple years later. I'm talking about 1994, I'm sorry. Not directly attacking Arafat, because that's not what they did, but ignoring him. So Gaza became Hamas land, and all Arafat could do was, BS it or something. That's what he said. I don't know about it. I'm looking for him, trying to find him, this and that and the other. But the bottom line is, they were already in business, shooting rockets and sending out suicide bombers. Where did Israel kill that engineer we talked about this? In Gaza City. Why'd they have to do it in such a roundabout way? The Israeli army was not in Gaza City. It was a Palestinian territory already. Okay, so it did not include the 8,000 Jews in what we colloquially call Gush Katif. Now, the main target of Gaza in those years was the Gush Katif, I'm using that term broadly, which is a group of Israeli settlements that were protected by the Israeli army. These settlements dated from right after the Six-Day War, okay? Back in the original iteration, remember Yigal Allon? He's the one that set up Yamit, and this is going to be the Jewish part. It's going to block the Arabs from having contiguous territory in the Gaza Strip and all kind of cheshbonos like this. And of course, it was a different time, and Begin, Golda was a different era. Frankly, it was an era of Zionist hubris. That, we beat the Arabs, this is before the Yom Kippur War. So we beat the Arabs, we can beat them again with both hands tied around their backs, and we can set up settlements and everything, it doesn't matter. What are we talking about? This, okay? These are all the Israeli settlements over here, about 8,500 people, okay? Here in the bigger picture, Israel pulls out of Sinai, as we know. So that's what we're looking at. By the Second Intifada, which is in 2000, remember that? Second Intifada. Hamas, from inside Gaza City, was rocketing and hitting the Jewish settlements in the Gush Katif. True, Israel hit back, and the only way it knows how to down till today, by assassinating Hamas leaders, but that did not stop the attacks. I told you before, we keep fighting to the end. Even if they kill us, we get new people to replace it. And if they kill me, then somebody else will take my place. We're not going to ever stop. That's all. That's the plan. Okay? So the only way you can stop this is to kill each and every one of them. Otherwise, you can't stop it. So look at this. During the Second Intifada, Gush leaves thousands of attacks of militants, with 6,000 mortar and Qassam rockets launched in some of it. 6,000 rockets? 6,000? Okay. These attacks had a few deaths, but a psychological distress. Most ground attacks by Palestinian gunmen. It's obviously written by a pro-Palestinian person. He used the word gunman on it. Infiltration tactics, including attempts by sea. Oh, so it wasn't only on October 7th they tried the boat thing. We forget this, you understand? Victims include 18-year-old killed by a sniper in November 2000, 5 teenagers shot in March 2002 when they infiltrated the pre-military academy, I guess that's the Mechina, in Otzma. Attacks on vehicles in Kisavu were common. Many ground attacks assaulted Israeli men, but fatal attacks included. It happens so often, we don't remember. What I mean, we don't remember them, you become blurred to them. You understand? You become blurred. Another bomb attack in Israel, another bomb attack in Israel, unless it's somebody you know. A school bus in November 2000, a man and woman dead 30, several maimed children, 2000, a 36-year-old man. February 2000, 30-year-old woman, her along with 2 soldiers, were killed. Ambushed the Tali Hotel with 8 months pregnant and 4 young daughters, and so forth and so on. This is what I mean by the drip, drip, drip that never stops. Okay? Now, by this time, when all this was going on, Sharon was already prime minister. That was the election of 2000. Okay? Remember, I'm talking about a time when they had the system that they don't have today of direct election of prime ministers. You remember that? They tried that. These poli-sci professors, fools. The poli-sci professors in Israel around 1990 said the problem with Israel is that you don't have, like America, direct election, therefore the Frum have too much influence. Yes, this is what they said. Therefore, if they'll have a presidential type election for the prime minister, then they'll be able to cancel it. It turned out to be the opposite. Because each guy running wants the Aguda vote, so to speak, wants the Mizrahi vote. Everybody had to kiss up, and the professors themselves later on said, we made a mistake, let's withdraw it, and they have withdrawn it. So now they went back to the old system where you only vote for the party, okay? At that time, there were 2 elections. One, you voted for the prime minister. Second one, you voted for the party. But my point is that Sharon was the prime minister at that time, and every week, every day, every week, he's going to Shiva houses. Look at this.
אני רוצה לומר, בכך שהחלטתם להתיישב כאן, תרמתם תרומה ממדרגה ראשונה, הן ביטחונית והן מדינית, לעתידה של ישראל. ואני שואל, האם אפשר לפנות את רצועת עזה?
That's before he was prime minister.
חודשים, איפה אתה מאיפה? בשביל מה? אתה השליח שלנו, תעשה את העבודה. תכניס אותם לכלא ותעשה מלחמה. אתה יודע לעשות מלחמה. ואתה לא מפחד מכלום. לא פחדת מסברה ושתילה. הלבישו עליך, לא פחדת, לא התרגשת. שמו אותך כי יודעים שאריק שרון יודע לעשות מלחמה. גדלתי על זה. אריק, גדלתי על זה מהיום שהתחלתי להבין א' ב'. וזה נכון, נכון שזה נכון? זה נכון? זה נכון? יופי. אז אנחנו רוצים שתעשה מלחמה!
This is one time, okay? Now, I want to say something. At least he had the guts to go. You have to give him that. Internally, the Israeli left and parts of the center, parents of the Chayalim, were complaining their sons are being sacrificed for these insane settlements in the middle of millions of Arabs, okay? Which they, the parents, strongly disapproved of anyway, because we're not talking about the right-wingers, we're talking about the non-right-wingers. This, they said, was not national defense, but right-wing imperialism. In other words, Yigal alone decided to put some kibbutzim, whatever, in the middle of a bunch of Arabs. My son has to go and get hurt to defend this sort of thing. He's not defending Israel. That's what they said. These feelings were poisoning morale. And the prime ministers, interesting to me, who were former generals, combat generals, not chicken hawks, were particularly sensitive to such complaints, and particularly sensitive to troop morale. Notice, if you've actually been a commander, you understand the necessity of this sort of thing. Rabin was chief of staff, and so was Barak, as you know, and Sharon was almost chief of staff. And they said Israel cannot afford a Vietnam syndrome. Okay. Now, of course, Hamas and company were totally aware of this. Why not? You learn about your enemy and try to use what you can, what you know about your enemy for that. If you're fighting a democracy, you try to take advantage of that fact. Okay. Like Rabin in 1993 and like Ehud Barak in 2000, Ariel Sharon concluded he would rather have Chayalim fighting from inside Israel with good morale than fighting in the Shtachim with bad morale. What happened in October 7th, or more likely October 8th? The whole Israel said, we're going to fight this, right? Certainly in the beginning. Why? We weren't in the Gaza Strip at all. They came and attacked us, and barbarically. So it's clear they want to kill us. Okay, then I agreed that my son should go and fight. And if he gets killed or something like that, chas v'shalom, I understand what it was for. You see what I'm saying? Lochamim alabayit, they call it. In other words, the morale was there, and that's why Israel was able to fight the war. Suppose the morale was not there. Now, I'm going to say something interesting. During this war, now it's over 2 years, that lasted 2 years, the Gaza war, as far as I'm aware, there was plenty of demonstrations against the war, but not in the army. The soldiers that were there, and many of you have kids and relatives and stuff that you know I'm talking about firsthand better than I do. You understand? It's terrible conditions, and fighting in the tunnels, God help us, and I mean, I know that. But nobody was questioning, what are we doing here? Because they're totally aware, after October 7th, that unless we kill these guys, they're going to come tomorrow and try to do it again. You see? So that really is the reason for these withdrawals, right or wrong. So at least that's the price you have to pay to get your soldiers to be totally motivated and put in the full effort and get the basic support behind the lines. That's why America waited till Pearl Harbor. You understand? I mean, that's the reason. So it's a terrible price to have to pay, but that's the reasoning, okay? The problem, of course, was that Ariel Sharon's own party, the Likud party, strongly disagreed. You see, the counter-argument goes like this. The more you yield to the dog, the more the dog wants. Simple as that. In the Likud's view, Ehud Barak had made a bad mistake by withdrawing from Lebanon, and Rabin had made a bad mistake with the Oslo Agreement. And now Sharon wants to compound it. Furthermore, it won't work. Hamas won't stop. It will take the win and then attack even more vigorously. And as I said, there really are 2 points of view. You see? There are arguments on both sides. There really are. It's not black and white. Bibi, the finance minister at that time, led the attack in the Likud, eventually resigning. Indeed, a Likud plebiscite voted against the plan. I don't know if anybody remembers. They did a seker in Likud. It was like 2/3 or more said, don't do any kind of withdrawal from Gaza. But Sharon said, I'm not bound by a plebiscite in the party, which he wasn't. And may I remind you, he was directly elected as prime minister by a majority of the people. So what happened was the Likud split, with Sharon demanding that he be followed. He said, I know more about security than all you put together. And hold on for a second, I'm going to show you something where he says basically, this after it hit Nakud, he's being interviewed and he said like this, it was funny for me, if you know how to darshan his words, so I'm going to do that for you to translate it into American. I was a general. I fought in battles in real life situations. And, I had to take responsibility for life and death. And then I come to Knesset and meet people who've never done anything. And they have the same amount of power that I have when it comes to security. And that doesn't make any sense to me. Which is another way of him saying like this, I'm not interested in party democracy. I know about military stuff and you guys don't. And I'm saying we're pulling out. Now take a look at this.
באתי לכנסת בפעם הראשונה אחרי שחזרתי ממלחמת יום הכיפורים, אחרי שעוד הייתי כמה חודשים במצרים, באתי לכנסת זה משבר גדול בשבילי, זאת אומרת, זה אחד המשברים הקשים.
המעבר מהצבא לאזרחות?
לא, זה לא זה שפתאום אין לך סמכות של, נאמר, של שכרה או... שכרה, אני לא הייתה לי פעם שכרה, זאת אומרת, פעם לא נהגתי בצורה הזאת. אבל לא, עצם העובדה שאתה ראית את הדברים הכי נוראים, את ההחלטות הכי קשות, החלטות של חיים ומוות, של אחרים ושלך עצמך. ואתה נתקל באנשים שמעולם לא עמדו בפני שום החלטה רצינית. שום החלטה רצינית. שום החלטה של, נאמר, של חיים ומוות. אנשים שלא ראו לא שמחת ניצחון ולא חשו כאב מפלה. והוא בעצם, מידת ההשפעה שלו היא כמידת ההשפעה שלך. אני לא עושה כרגע לגבי הצד של הדמוקרטיה וכן הלאה, אני מדבר על תחושה, כן, של...
That's it. So that's his attitude. So now Sharon obviously was thinking about the precedent a few years before, well, 20 years before, of Yamit, which he himself had forcibly evacuated, even though others had said it couldn't be done. As part of the Menachem Begin peace treaty, Israel had to evacuate all the settlers in the Sinai desert. If you remember, right over the border from the Gaza Strip was Yamit, which Menachem Begin actually bought an apartment there, if you recall. He said, that's where I'm going to have my retirement and so forth. And the way the politics works was that Begin himself, at the end of his first term, was defense minister. And he appointed Sharon in no small part because he said, I guess, you're the only guy that can get these settlers out of here. Okay? It's going to be rough. But you can do it, and he did it. So basically, if you're telling Sharon in 2004 you can't kick Jews out, it can be done. Yeah, take a look.
Indeed, 4,000 settlers left voluntarily, and 1,000 settlers refused to leave.
This is Yamit.
On April 21, 1982, 7 years after the construction of the Yamit settlement, the Israeli operation, Red Dome, began to evacuate the settlement by force, using 200,000 soldiers and policemen, 50 bulldozers, and 7,000 kilograms of dynamite. The operation was met with violent confrontations from the settlers. The settlers barricaded themselves, and extremist Kahanists led them on the roofs of the houses, and some threatened suicide. The soldiers attacked the houses and hung wooden ladders on the walls to climb onto the roofs of the houses. The settlers tried to knock them down with iron bars. In some cases, 15 soldiers were climbing one ladder. All kinds of projectiles and burning car tires were thrown at them. The soldiers used tear gas and a sticky substance that causes suffocation to those who inhale it. The soldiers managed to climb onto the roofs of the houses, pulled the settlers by their legs, and loaded them into transport vehicles to be deported outside Sinai. The Israelis transported the furniture and removed the windows and doors from the settlement. On April 23, 1982, about 50 bulldozers destroyed Yamit, in addition to
Now, because that's the place. Do you see what he said? They tried to knock the soldiers off ladders and get killed. I mean, we forget this because there was no CNN at that time. You know, there was no internet and all the rest of it. So, what's that? There were cell phones? There weren't. Oh, or cell phones. Yeah, right. So wait a second. Well, what are you talking about? Dick Tracy. Anyway, hold on for a second. It was rough. But Sharon's like this. It can be done. So it'll be rough. It'll be done. That's what he said. Now, this was under Menachem Begin, mind you. So Sharon's like this. Do you have tainas on Menachem Begin? They wouldn't do that in the Likud. But Yamit, of course, had been in the Sinai, which was a crucial difference, meaning it's not part of Eretz Yisrael per se, according to most opinions, okay? Or maybe I'm wrong. Was it different? Not to the diehards of not 1 inch. Who opposed the Yamit? The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Kahana, and the others? right? They said it's a terrible. In fact, I think he didn't want to talk to Begin after this, something like that. So what's going on over here? It's a major question of Zionism, right? The definition of Zionism. While Zionism lays claim to all of Eretz Yisrael, does the state of Israel lay claim to all of Eretz Yisrael? The state of Israel has never given a clear answer ever since the Arabs rejected the 1947 partition plan. We all know this was what Israel was supposed to look like according to the UN, and this is what Israel ended up looking like after the War of Independence. They had a lot of territory. When you ask Ben Gurion, he says, is this all you want? Like I'm doing now. We'll see. We'll see, But Ben Gurion, Moshe Sharab would say, I guess, are the Arabs okay with this? Right? In other words, let's hear if the other side is okay with it. So they never give a hard and fast answer to all this business. Already in 1956, Ben Gurion, people don't notice, quietly modified his claims because of the masses of Arabs the state would have to absorb, ending a Jewish majority, which would then be like a political apartheid, which wasn't a possibility. So when they conquered the Sinai Desert and the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip, there were many in Israel like Begin said, well, you can't withdraw all the rest of it, even though Eisenhower was threatening them. And if you really know what went inside, Ben Gurion went to visit the Gaza Strip. He said, there's too many Arabs here. He said, what are we going to do? And so, without saying it, because he would never hurt his image, he basically said, all right, what we have is what we have. That's what it's going to be. You and I know Eshkol and company were not looking for war in June of 1967. They tried not to. Remember, Abibin ran all over the place. That's him with Johnson. He went to De Gaulle and all the rest of it. They didn't want the war because they weren't looking, this is an opportunity to conquer the West Bank. If it was up to them, the 67 war would not have happened, right? But Menachem Begin, that's a different side of Zionism, never gave up Eretz Yisrael. Well, it's not true. He gave up on half. Really, according to the Cherut, Shtei Gadot Liyarden, right? That's their song. Both sides of the Jordan belong to us. No, there's Israel today and Jordan. I don't remember Menachem Begin, certainly after 67, but probably before that, saying we want Jordan also. Really? Want Jordan? Is that right? What's the plan? Okay? So, but Meidach Gisa, he didn't give up on this side of Israel, on our side of the Jordan River, without saying what the plan is. Begin and the right never explained what their policy towards the Arabs in the Shtachim. If you annex it all, are you going to make 5 million Arabs Israeli citizens or something like that? Until 1977, Begin wasn't in power. He could just make speeches. But then he had to sort of, if you remember, Jimmy Carter pressed him from day one. So what is Israel's plan for the future? What do you plan to do with the West Bank? And if you remember, he said, well, we'll give the Arabs a kind of self-rule and, to run their own affairs or something like that, which means he envisioned a situation in which the whole of Israel is the Jewish state, but the Arab communities have like their own autonomy within the Jewish state at the non-security level. So are they going to vote for the Knesset? He didn't talk about that. You see what I'm saying? Okay? I remember Carter kept pressing him on and on. The Israeli left had a growing fear that the Palestinians will say, please annex us. We all want to be annexed by Israel. That's what they should have done since 1947. You understand? That's it. The Rebbe Shalom so arranged it that they don't want to do that. They should have done that since, 1950. By 2000, 2004, when we're talking about, Ari Sharon shared this fear. He had never really been a chassid of Jabotinsky. He just joined the Likud, for what's the right? In fact, he created the Likud in 1973, which is a combination party of the Cherut and the Gachal and all the others and the right. He wasn't really a Talmud of Jabotinsky. In fact, Sharon was enough of an opportunist, that in the 2003 Knesset elections, which is just before this, he had pledged not to withdraw from Gaza. Okay? But as soon as he won, it was a different story. There was a famous debate he had with the head of the Labor Party, Amram Mitzna, gentlemen, the labor parties had a whole string of short leaders. So one of them was a guy, Amram Mitzner, who was a left-winger and all the rest, and he said, we have to have a hit not kut, we have to withdraw from the Gaza Strip and all the rest, and Sharon said, chas v'cholila, all the rest of it. But as soon as he won, he said, we have to do that. You see? So the paradox was, you have a Likud prime minister, I repeat, a Likud prime minister, pushing something antithetical to the Likud philosophy. On the other hand, the Likud never experienced what the long-term plan for Gush Katif and company was. Just that they haven't done so, never explained, what the plan was. Just that they haven't explained what the plan is for the settlements in the West Bank. Let's say you prevent anybody from starting another state. So what do you do with the millions of people that are living there? And how do you explain it to the world? This point I'm talking about is being pushed now very heavily the last 2 years. This is why the Europeans, everybody else, and Tucker Carlson and all the other junk are, saying Israel doesn't have a right to exist because there's no plan for them, how this would work. So what are you going to do? Here we have the interesting development of the Israeli right. Once upon a time, it was just Likud or Cherut. That was the right-wing party in Israeli politics until 1977. Anybody remembers that, But that changed after Yamit. What happened after they said they're pulling out of Sinai and they're going to close down an existing Jewish settlement? Starting from 81, they started to run in the Knesset and win votes, right-wing parties to the right of Menachem Begin. Who was it? Raphael Eitan, I remember. And, I forget the name of all the different parties, the Moledet, and this, that, and the other. That was something brand new in Israel. Those Likud is not far enough to the right for you, okay? Now, so by the early 21st century, which was the period we're talking about, Ariel Sharon simply did not see eye to eye with the right-wing parties, meaning to the parties to the right of him. In his opinion, in Sharon's opinion, Israel had to wage a political struggle with the PA, Palestinian Authority. After the entire world was on the side of the Palestinian Authority, Israel would lose and they would win. This is something very different than Bibi. If, on the other hand, Israel was to demonstrate its willingness to withdraw from territory and not annex it, then the world would see that Israel was not simply inflexible, and the world would support Israel's legitimate security concerns regarding the West Bank. That's his thinking, right? So in other words, the world counts. This wasn't completely wrong. After the disengagement, after Israel pulled out painfully from the Gaza Strip, the Bush administration did not lean on Israel to make concessions in the West Bank. In fact, Bush committed, unofficially, to opposing the right of return. I mean, no Palestinian state has emerged in the last 20 years. Right? No American administration said, this is it. Okay, you got to do it now. It's interesting. Here's Condoleezza Rice that we remember.
Members of my work with Ariel Sharon, and it was always surprising us. But he understood that perhaps everybody would be waiting for Israel to react in a very aggressive way. And because Israel showed restraint, I really have always believed that it gathered a certain moral high ground out of that decision that served Israel very, very well.
Yeah. Now, she's talking about in politics, okay? Because Israel lives in politics. It's not going to be any good if they defeat Hamas, which they have not, and lose the political struggle, and out of this 2-year war comes a Palestinian state, right? Because that means they will have won. So how do you calculate this? What I'm trying to say is that the main policy of Sharon was coordinate, coordinate, coordinate. You have to coordinate with the United States. That's how it goes. Now this is happening whether Israel likes it or not. But you can coordinate with the United States. Here, go to this. This is when he was elected in 2003.
אזרחי ישראל, היום בחרתם בי לכהן כראש ממשלת ישראל. הממשלה בראשותי תפעל להחזרת הביטחון לאזרחי ישראל.
כשהוא מתיישב על כיסא ראש הממשלה, הדימוי של שרון מיד ייכנס בהם בכוח, כן? ויעשה את מהלכי הבולדוזר שלו. לא. דבר ראשון צריך לייצר את אותה הבנה מדינית עם ארצות הברית.
Yes. The Prime Minister?
Bush.
How are you? Good to see you. Welcome.
How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Fine, how are you?
You're looking good.
In Petrus, you have to look good.
בפגישה הראשונה עם בוש, הציג לו תוכנית, כולל דיברו על מפות, הוא הראה לו עד איפה הוא מוכן ללכת, מה הוא מוכן לעשות, בתרחישים כאלה ואחרים. ואני חושב שהוא יצר אמון אצל בוש, והוא הראה לו תרחישים מאוד מרחיקי לכת.
Perhaps looking back on those reputations of Ariel Sharon, this was something of a shock. But the president had felt in his meeting, with his first meeting with Prime Minister Sharon, that he indeed was someone who was looking for peace.
Okay. Now, by contrast, in the current Gaza war, as I said, Bibi has not cared about world opinion, only the opinion of Joe Biden to some degree and Donald Trump to a big degree. As a result, the Palestinian Authority, in other words, Abu Mazen, has scored dangerous political achievements. So you can go and say, Chabdar al-Nzerd, you can do that, but there's usually a price that's paid for that, okay? Now, everything I said now is the positive version of events, that Sharon was motivated by genuine security concerns. There's another way to darshan this, and that's what the enemy said at that time. And if you remember, not that everybody has to keep all these memories in there, Sharon was up to his neck in dirty deals also. He's like, with his son, that son was a piece of work, Who names his kid Omri? And if he names his son Nimrod, I want to be in shul when they give him an aliyah. So anyhow, so they said, he's doing it to push off any investigation to him. There's probably some truth to that also. But listen, it's the same thing with Bibi. The only thing is Bibi got Trump to say, give him a pardon.
This man is a good man right here. These two men are good men right here. Hey, I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon?
What do you say to that? What do you say to that? Polls indicated that the public, the broad Israeli public at that time, 2004, backed the disengagement agreement 60-40. Now, 60 is a definite majority, 40 is a very big minority. So here we go with the question that can be in a synagogue, can be in a club, and anywhere. Do you go for, an absolute majority, 51 versus 49, or do you try to get consensus? Okay? And the old America of my youth, generally, in Senate and House, really, they look for a certain consensus. You make a concession, they scream and talk, but then in the end, they make a thing. And ever since, I don't know how long now, it's not been like that, right? And therefore, they don't make they don't give it on their part, they don't give it on their part. And we have, I think as we speak, there must be people over here who are furloughed. Am I right? Okay? So Israel can afford it even less than America, but that's the way it goes. Polls indicated that 40% passionately opposed it, with giant demonstrations, and there were even right-wingers who burned themselves alive in protest. Anybody remember this? Right? The people immolated themselves, they killed themselves. Right? That's how strongly were they're betraying Eretz Jews. They're betraying Eretz Yisrael, and they probably were from people, I suppose. I don't know. Ariel Sharon, to make sure of the legality of it, rammed through a law in the Knesset to disengage. So it's totally legal. They had a vote, and they passed a law that they're going to pull out of Gaza, and so on and so forth. This is a question of how much compensation and all the rest of it. It's a little bit like the judicial reform that's going down in Israel. It's 100% legal, but extremely controversial. The people, of course, who suffered the greatest anxiety was Kippah Sruga, the religious Zionist world, especially the real idealistic ones. I mean, genuine pain. Here, look at this. Wait a minute. This is when he got a stroke, but you'll see, this is the beginning. You'll see.
אזרחי ישראל, הגיע היום. אנחנו מתחילים את הצעד הקשה והכואב מכל פינוי יישובינו מחבל עזה וצפון השומרון. לא ניתן להחזיק בעזה לנצח. חיים שם יותר ממיליון פלסטינים שמכפילים את מספרם מדי דור. האמינו לי, הכאב שאני חש במעשה הזה, כמוהו כהכרה הנחרצת שעלינו לעשותו.
This is the father of settlements, destroying his babies.
אני לא מבין, אני לא מבין, אני חי את הבן אדם, כפי שראיתי אותו כל החיים, איך הוא מסביר כל החיים, והוא מתנהג בצורה שהיא סותרת את כל חייו. היהודים מפסיקים לנסוע בעגלות ממקום למקום, הם נקים שורשים באדמה, לא זורקים אותם. ומה אתה עושה? אתה לא מכיר אותם אפילו בהסכם וקיבלת משהו אחר. סתם אתה מעיף אותם, סתם, למה? למה? אתה לא מסביר למה, ככה, כי אני אמרתי שעכשיו זה טוב, עד היום אמרתי שזה רע, וזה אסון ואסור, והיום אני אמרתי שהיום צריך לעשות, והיום תקומו ותלכו. שאלת, מישהו מאיים עליך? מה קורה לך, אריק? מה? הוא לא עונה.
In other words, it's a unilateral thing. They didn't make a deal with the Palestinians. They didn't get anything out of it. They're just doing it. And you have betrayed us because we've been the ones peopling the settlements that you yourself set up and promised never to get rid of, and now you're just reversing. So in other words, you see from the guy's tone, who's a friend of his, he says, it's not simply opposition, it's a pain. You understand? In other words, it's a sense of deep betrayal. By this time, the Dati Lumi sector, I think we all know, 2004, was a whole subculture. It's a parallel universe to the Haredim. They got their institution, they got their institution. They got their Rabbanim, they got their Rabbanim. They got their books, they got their books. It's a whole parallel thing. You can go kindergarten through KBY, even Bar Ilan, as you know very well. What do they say? Atlanta born, Atlanta bred, and when you die, Atlanta dead. You know, you're in the system all the way through. And one of the core values, as we all know, of this subculture, along with Torah and Shmir Mitzvahs, without question, was Kedushat Eretz Yisrael, Kedushat Ha'yashvut. That the sanctity of Israel and the sanctity of settlements in Israel. I mean, really. So it's not just people sitting in Shomer Amunah, you know, that's the thing. They're living it. I think everybody here, I assume, has been there to Israel. And we've all been, as they say, in this area and that. You've seen the Yeshuvim, all the rest of them. People are putting themselves on the line. Yamid had been bad enough. But Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael, L'choladeyot, right? There's no question about that. I don't want to hear any Shemitah stuff, you know, but it's what do you call it? No, but I mean, you know, it's not the Sinai Desert, it's part of Eretz Yisrael. The Rabbanim and Rosh Hashivas of the Mizrahi world were integral ideologists of this Hashkafa. The chief rabbis at that time was Rabbi Shapiro and Mordechai Eliyahu. They're big Gedol, I mean, they are, right? And boy, they were totally against it. Mordechai Eliyahu, my goodness, you know, we're all against it. In fact, what was the big question at that time? Should religious soldiers disobey orders? Which is a very dangerous phenomenon in a country like Israel, because it depends on the military, and the military depends on obeying orders. Different rabbis in the Kippah Gur world argue different sides of the question, and I think many of us probably remember that. On the one hand, an army depends on obeying orders. On the other hand, everybody agrees you don't obey Nazi-type orders. That's like a consensus since 1945. And to somebody like Mordechai Eliyahu, to tell somebody to kick a Jew out of Israel is equivalent to a Nazi order. That's how he saw it. No, it's not as a shtick or as a political. He really did. But of course, the left and the center don't see it that way. Well, we all know Ariel Sharon carried this out in August of 2005. Okay.
The father of settlements, destroying his babies. And I've always said that the Israelis must choose between one day, settlements or peace. They cannot have both.
אני רוצה ממש לפנות לכולם לא לתקוף את החיילות ואת החיילים ואת השוטרות ואת השוטרים לא להאשים אותם, לא להקשות עליהם. תפגעו בי. אני אחראי לכך. תפגעו בי, תאשימו אותי.
הסכרים שהאריק פרץ פה ושבר, זעזעו את כל אמות הסיפים.
אין התנתקות! לא הייתה! לא תהיה! שקר! שקר! שקר!
המחשבה, אם הדבר הזה אפשרי, יכול להמשיך הלאה. כל המפעל הזה שעשינו במהלך שנות דור יכול להיחרב. אם אפשר לעקור אותו, אפשר להמשיך אותו הלאה על כל מדינת ישראל גם כן. מבחינת ההרגשה שיש אפשרות, הציונות היא דבר שאפשר להחזיר אותו את הגלגל.
You see what he said? He said, hit me, and then he got a stroke. And it's amazing. Now, this only happened. This was not only in Gaza. If anybody remembers, they also pulled out some yeshuvim in the north of Sharon. This was not supposed to be a one-time thing. Understand this well. Sharon got sick, and he got out of commission. But the next stage was to pull out the yeshuvim from the West Bank. He was going to dismantle many settlements, keeping only ones contiguous to the Green Line and some others. So they talk in Israel about hit not kud versus his kasut, right? From kones. Hit kansut, that's it. Which is concentrating, so we'll pull them all over here. So basically, they rip them a bunch out and relocate them. A physical, and then protected by a wall. And then it'll be this side is Israel, and this side of Yaris, and stay away. That was the plan. Now, the Likud certainly had not signed up for that. In other words, not just to pull the settlements out of Gush Katif, but to pull all the Yeshuvim from Yehuda v'Shomron. That is not what the Likud signed up for. This is the opposite of Begin. You understand? If it was just Gush Katif, that's controversial enough. The whole thing, Sharon had made up his mind to bulldoze all the settlements that couldn't fit into a scheme. This was radical. His radical left. So within 90 days of this, Sharon formed a new party, Kadima, not subject to revisionist shibboleths. I don't want to hear about Shtei Gadol Yardin. This is what we're doing. Sharon planned to take this party into the next elections, which are going to be 90 days later. So 90 days after the disengagement, they made a new party. And 90 days later will be the elections, okay? He was expecting to knock out the Likud. And in my opinion, he was going to recreate a certain type of mapai. I think that's what he was looking for. And carry a two-state solution the way he envisioned it. Well, because he wanted, it's like mapai. You have some people from the right, some people, he pulled in, if you remember, some politicians, Shimon Peres, by the way, joined, from the left, and some other guys jumped the thing from the right, Olmer and all the rest of it. In his mind, to me, in his mind, he's like an old mapai type. And then they'll just do what they want to do, okay? They'll just do what they want to do. But then he got the stroke and was effectively dead. We'll talk about that next week. I just want to say a few words. So notice that part didn't happen. Part one happened when they kicked everybody out of the Gaza Strip. The part two didn't happen. I want to just say a few words about this phenomenon. I have this sefer now. I forgot to bring it with me. It's very interesting. Rabbi Shirlo. This hit nakud caused a tremendous spiritual crisis in the Kippah Sruga world, which is not shared by the people in the Haredim and all the. It's a different experience. And Rabbi Yuval Shirlo is very well known in the Kippah Sruga world. He published a book, Sheilot U'Tshuvot HaHit Nakud. In other words, people, boys and girls from Bnei Akiva, from army units, from Yeshuvim, from Sherut Lumi, nice people, the nicest, the best of the best, are writing him in spiritual crisis. Can I support the state of Israel from now on? I can't bring myself to sing HaTikvah. I can't, in my shul, we're canceling the prayer for the Medina. Things like that, okay? And like I say, if you're not part of that culture, you just won't appreciate it. But I think we're all intelligent enough to understand the terrible things that I'm not even doing justice. They had a lot other ones like that, right? I don't want to be in the army. The army's a Russia, take a thing. Me, myself, and I was a couple years after this. my son-in-law has an aunt. No, Yisrael back has an aunt that they were one of these displaced people from Gush Katif, and they resettled in some place. I think it was right against the Egyptian border. I don't think it was in the Gaza Strip, but it was south of the Gaza Strip against the border. And the whole yeshiva, and I came there once with my kids just visiting when they were dedicating a new base medrash, as it happens. And you know, right above them were the balloons that's supposed to tell if the Palestinians are coming, all that thing. And they don't say a prayer for Israel, but everybody's in the army. And they're living on the border. So it's like a certain cognitive dissonance. They're not giving up in Israel, Lamaisa, but they're giving up all the shtick and the rhetoric about Israel. You see? And now this is old news. What I mean by that is this is 20 years later and everybody's fighting for their life. So this whole issue has been forgotten in that sense. Except that the precedent is there, al tivtchu b'netivim, like King David said. You can't trust princes. You can't trust governments and all the rest of it. And they know this. The result, therefore, is for people in the Kippah Rugur world, it was like the equivalent of the Arthur Kessler book in 1949, The God That Failed. Right? When these are people who are ex-communists, were disillusioned with Marx. So who are these people disillusioned with? I'll use Herzl as a general term, okay? But I don't mean him specifically, but the whole Zionist idea of a certain era. After this, you can't look at it the same way anymore. These people, as you know, were so angry that they put a curse on Sharon, Pulsa the Nur, as they call it, albeit a Kabbalistic curse. And Taka, like I say, within a short time afterwards, he effectively died because he never got off the bed from the stroke. So, looking at the perspective, I mean, if you're religious, you can judge it in a lot of different ways. But it was a very controversial business. They carried out part one. He died basically before they could carry out part two. This left Israel in a funny kind of situation vis-a-vis America and the rest of the world, because you got to admit that they did pull out over here. Are they going to be able to do the other part and pull that out? Sharon got knocked out. Ehud Olmert, as we'll see, said, I want to do it. And after Tzipi Livni says, I want to do it also. They wanted, in the years, the following years, to do exactly what was planned, which is to liquidate all the settlements and reconcentrate them or something like that. And that was the nature of politics during the second Bush administration. It didn't happen, did it? Now, all the time, when all this is going on, Hamas is shooting rockets in Israel. So what has happened, broadly speaking, is that the Palestinian Authority became kind of weak, and they're not the ones specifically threatening Israel. The Hamas got more and more strong for various reasons that we'll go into, and we know the consequences of this. All the wars, I just want to end with this, all the wars that happened since the Hit Not Could, which is every 2 years, is Hamas. None of the wars, well, there's one exception with Hezbollah, but in other words, they're not coming from the West Bank. All the fights, almost every 2 years, is come from the Hamas. It's just that, let's put it this way, Sharon didn't look right after it's over, but maybe I'm wrong. Did the disengagement work? The hour is late, so let's close it down now.